Hello. I want to say a few words about the case of Sarah Everard, the young woman who was murdered in London, kidnapped and murdered. It's a very sad case, and it's elicited a lot of responses. It's the number one news item at the moment, actually, on the BBC. Um, so there's a few angles I want to look at, but I want to start with the controversy around Baroness Jones of the Green Party, who said that there should be a curfew of men from 6 p.m. Now, some have said that this was taken out of context and she was merely responding to the suggestion that women shouldn't go out. But I have always taken the view that if you're a public figure, you need to be responsible of your words. So even if she didn't literally mean that, and it was meant as irony or it was meant as sort of trying to reverse the situation as she saw it, it's still problematic because a lot of people have taken that literally, and she's kind of doubled down. I don't think she's really done much to say, well, no, I wasn't talking about men not going out. A lot of people are interpreting that as a public figure who's responding to this tragic event um, by overreach and by scaremongering as well. If such a proposal was to be taken seriously, and it won't, but if it was, just to demonstrate how absurd it would be, what would you have? You'd have a situation where men who might have to go out are restricted. So, for example, a single father or a man who's a carer, he could be a carer for his wife, his mother, his girlfriend, his sister. Um, he could be a single father looking after a sick child. He may have to go out after 6 p.m. because he might work in the day. There's a lot of individual circumstances. Go out for necessities like to a pharmacy or to a shop. I know, for example, in my family, my younger sister has a lot of health problems, and often my dad has to go out at different times to get things for her that are essential. So, if such a proposal was to be taken seriously, it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't stop bad men from, wouldn't get them to suddenly think, oh, I'm not going to hurt women. They might be a little bit more vigilant, but I don't think it would stop it. So it's a ridiculous proposal. If it was taken out of context, I still say that she was wrong to have said that, because as a public figure, particularly over a sensitive case like this, she should be responsible in her words. She could have criticized the notion that women shouldn't go out in a different way. Now, on that point, I think it's important to stress that there is a difference between saying that people should be practical versus victim blaming. I think some women are interpreting, be pragmatic as blaming the victims. Um, that's not the same thing. Blaming the victim in this case, you know, if you um, if you live in an area where there's a lot of burglaries and you leave your door wide open and you come back and something is stolen, not your fault, it's the fault of the burglar. However, it is still reckless to leave your door open. So if a young woman goes out at midnight, just as an example, and I know, I'm not saying this is the case with Sarah Everard, but if a young woman went out late at night by herself in a rough area and something happened to her, it's not her fault, but it's a little bit reckless. Like if she went out, for example, without an alarm or without some sort of way to defend herself, it would be a bit reckless. And I don't think it's victim blaming to say that. So that's all people are saying. I don't think anyone is saying that women shouldn't go out at all. Um, and if they are, that's the wrong thing to say. Now, what's particularly troubling about this case is the man apprehended is a Metropolitan Police officer. Cressida Dick, the commissioner, said that sent ripples of shock through her force. But today's actions, forcibly breaking up the vigil at Clapham Common, it really does them no favours. I mean, can the Metropolitan Police not see the optics of this? And parliamentarians have criticised what they've done. One of their own is the main suspect, and yet their response is to be heavy handed with people who are holding a vigil for this young woman. It's just, you know, can they not see the optics of that? There's also double standards because when the Black Lives Matter protests were going on, the Mayor of London gave that a green light, and of course, Met Police were taking the knee. So it's clearly double standards. Um, as one of the organisers said, if the police had helped them to organise this, they could have done it with, in COVID-friendly conditions. They were wearing masks. It was crowded, but I think that the Met really, you know, that was very bad judgment and very bad behaviour. To take, they even pinned one woman to the ground, treating them like common criminals, when all they're doing is holding a vigil for a young woman that was murdered in all likelihood by one of their officers. Very bad optics. Now, on another very important point with all of this, context. The United Kingdom remains one of the safest countries in the world, actually, in terms of homicide rates. Our overall homicide rate is very low. If you look at international rankings, and you could look at different sources for this, Wikipedia is a useful one, but there's other sources. The United Kingdom, and there are slightly different figures for England and Wales versus Scotland and Northern Ireland, but as a general, the median for the United Kingdom, it's very near the bottom. It's something like of 200 countries and territories in the world, we literally are about 20th from the bottom. Um, there's a few countries that are even safer than us. Italy, Japan. Japan is extremely safe society, and of course there's little microstates and Pacific islands that have very few homicides. Literally, um, where the highest figures tend to be Central and South America and some African states. Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, is quite high. South Africa is high. Honduras is very high. El Salvador is very high. Colombia, Brazil, not surprisingly. Brazil has improved, it has to be said. The United States is higher than Western Europe, but still a lot lower than Central America and South America. But I think that's important to look at because I also think that some of the organisers, for example, in Reclaim Our Streets, need to be responsible about the sort of things they're claiming. Fact of the matter is, we have a low homicide rate, and within that, most homicide victims are men. And within, that, if you break it down, for example, Jess Phillips, the outspoken feminist MP, she read out this list of women who were murdered by men. That's very emotive. That's very, but frankly, it's a little bit manipulative because it sends out a message that there's a problem that is bigger than it is. She read out 118 names. Now, 118 is 118 too many. Every one of those is a life. Every one of those is a shattered family. And, no statistics will ever bring comfort to a victim of serious crime. But facts do matter. And I think, this idea that women are under impending danger in this country, in this case, the main suspect has already been apprehended. I don't think there is any pressing danger there. That people say you're not a woman, well, I'm not unsympathetic to the anxiety that women feel. I just think that there needs to be some rationality as well. The presenter Davina McCall made a good point about men's mental health. So stigmatizing all men, tarnishing all men because of what's happened is not the right way to go forward either. She said women need to be vigilant, but let's be practical about this. And I agree with her. I think the correct approach is that the Met really need to check the vetting process. They need to find out why is it this man, who's obviously a danger to women, got through the ranks. What was his connections to the victim? Was he stalking her? Was there any relationship dynamic? There's a lot of questions that will need to be asked around this case. Um, but I think that there needs to be also a situation where people aren't scaremongering and making women feel like, the second they go out the door they'll be murdered. That's reckless, and it doesn't correspond to the facts. On the point about collective punishment, and again, I'm aware that Baroness Jones, apparently her words were taken out of context, but let's say there was an Islamist attack, and then suddenly there was some sort of proposal to ban all Muslims from public places. That would be discriminatory. It's no different with doing the same with all men. So that may have been, just a scenario situation rather than an actual proposal. But I think there are some feminists who, if they got away with it, they would push something like that. Um, you do not tackle bad men by punishing all men. That just is not the way to go forward. Um, Facts matter. Most murder victims in this country are men. But it is awful what happened. This was a young woman who had the rest of her life ahead of her. I mean, I personally find it very hard to believe how anyone could do that. Murder in general is a terrible thing, but to murder, um, a defenseless young woman, it's horrendous. Especially if she was kidnapped as well. That's awful. Um, so the details of this case will need to be looked at to see if that could correspond to any sort of trait or any sort of situation that might require further investigation. I mean, if there was, for example, a track record of other young women being kidnapped and murdered in London with similar situations, then it might be that this opens up an inquiry into if he maybe hurt other women as well. By the looks of it, he's a middle-aged man, so it's possible that he's done this before. Something like that would be legitimate to look at, I think. Um, and with that, I'll round this up. But there's a few sticking points to this. Number one, is the double standards of that vigil, breaking it up forcefully. That was disgraceful. And the Met should be ashamed of themselves for responding so forcefully. Okay, technically they may have been breaking lockdown restrictions, but to be so forceful about it, particularly given the sentiments, particularly given one of their officers is the main suspect, disgraceful. The Met really do themselves no favours with stuff like that. Secondly, Baroness Jones is a public figure. She should have known this is a sensitive case, and for her to be inflammatory and make that sort of proposition, even if it was tongue in cheek, not meant to be taken literally, I think it's reckless and I think it's wrong. And she should amend her words and make it clear that's not what she meant. Um, and finally, it's very important that people look at the whole picture. The United Kingdom is still a pretty safe country. In London, there is a serious problem with knife crime, and I do think we have a problem in this country with yob culture. But frankly, you're far more likely to be assaulted in Britain than murdered. That's something that needs to be borne in mind. Of all the countries in the world, I mean, there's places where femicide is a very real problem. There's parts of Mexico where literally dozens of young women have simply disappeared. Um, that is not the situation in this country, at least not in the context of this. One could argue in the north of England there has been a problem of so-called honour killings, and there is an issue there. But the average woman in Britain is far, far safer than her counterpart in Mexico and in many other parts of the world, and that has to be considered. And I just hope that Sarah Everard's family can get justice.